Have you ever wondered what it's like to work in law enforcement? Here on Behind the Star, we share stories about the Orange County Sheriff's Office, Central Florida's largest law enforcement agency. From forensics to dispatch to the deputies on patrol, we'll talk to the brave men and women who protect our community. This is Behind the Star, the official podcast of the Orange County Sheriff's Office. Welcome to Behind the Star, the official podcast of the Orange County Sheriff's Office. My name is Jon Busdeker, the official host of Behind the Star and storyteller here at the Sheriff's Office. And first of all, I want to apologize for last week. We had to skip an episode because we were preparing for a big meeting we had with the community called Focus, a community briefing with Sheriff Mina. It was kind of an overview of all the cool things we're doing here at the Sheriff's Office. So we had a lot of work to do to prepare for that, and so I apologize that we didn't have last week's episode, but that just means we have an extra special episode this week, and this month is actually Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and so I wanted to bring some folks in to talk about that and what we do here at the Sheriff's Office to combat domestic violence. And so I have Corporal Jessie Bourque of the Domestic Crimes Unit. Hello, Jessie.
Hello, John.
And we also have Jessie Motley, who is an early victim engagement advocate for Harbor House here.
Hey, John.
So before we get too far, I'm going to say both of you are named Jessie. That was not me messing up names. And so I'm going to call Jessie Bourque Corporal Bourque throughout this, and I'm going to call you Jessie, just so people don't get confused here.
Not a problem.
All right. So first off, I'm going to start with Corporal Bourque here. Why don't you explain what exactly is the Domestic Crimes Unit?
So we investigate crimes of domestic violence, dating violence, child abuse, and missing people.
And so with that, I mean, how does that work? I mean, do our deputies go out first and they get the call and then you come in later, or is your unit out there getting the calls and responding to them? How does that work?
So patrol deputies get the initial report. They conduct their initial investigation, meet with the victim, and hopefully they're able to make an arrest of the defendant who's committed the crime. And then we review all of those reports in my unit and see if there's follow-up that needs to be made. And if there's not an arrest, we go out and we make that arrest.
And we'll dig a little deeper into that. But Jessie, I wanted to ask you, so yes. What is your involvement with all this? How does Harbor House fit in with the Sheriff's Office, and what is your role here?
My role here is with working with the early victim engagement is reaching out to survivors within 24 to 72 hours once a crime has occurred with the survivor. At that time, I reach out and I offer services of mainly our safety plan. Also, we tailor a safety plan for our survivors. We also help them through the civil side of the criminal process and also with the criminal process as well, and explaining all of that to the survivor because it's very complicated once you've experienced all that trauma.
So once again, we're going to get into that a little bit in more detail here pretty soon. But I like to kind of go back a little bit before we get really involved and really in detail about what you do here. I want to find out how you ended up here. So I'm going to start with Corporal Bourque. How did you end up here at the Sheriff's Office?
So I've been here for a little over 10 years now, and I was in college, didn't really know what I wanted to major in, and somehow ended up in criminal justice. Okay. And then I wound up in this career.
So did you start off as like a patrol deputy, and then you ended up in the domestic crimes?
Yes. So I was in patrol for about 6 or 7 years, got promoted to corporal, stayed in patrol, and then the opening in domestic crimes opened up, and I was interested in it.
How come? Why were you interested in the domestic crimes?
For stuff growing up in my life, I had experienced some of that growing up, and it was just really passionate and important to me.
All right. So how about you, Jessie? How did you end up here at the Sheriff's Office? I know because I should say you work for Harbor House.
Yes.
But you're stationed here.
Yes,
you're
collaboration.
Okay.
With the sheriff.
So how did you end up here?
Yes. About 5 years ago, the Domestic Violence Task Force or the Commission approached Harbor House, and we decided to do an early victim engagement program where we have myself here. We also have somebody at the Booking and Release Center and also at Apopka Police Department as well. So they approached me about 5 years ago, and I went out and job shadowed with the manager at the time, and I was said, I am in.
So did you work at Harbor House at that time? And
Yes, I did.
Okay, so this opened up, and you're
Yes.
like, I want to do that.
Yes, I did.
So what was it about wanting to come here and work? Have you always worked here at Central Ops?
No, I have not. I
Oh.
worked for Harbor House for approximately 14 years. I started off as the donation coordinator, also the volunteer coordinator, became the development officer. And after that, I went into direct client care with survivors, working directly with them in the shelter. And at the previous time, my CEO and chief operating officer approached me about this particular position that was just launching off. And they said, we think that you'd be a great fit and take a look at it. And I just came out and observed my manager at the time with one of the detectives. And from that moment on, I just knew that this was my passion and what I wanted to go for.
All right. So let's kind of break down how this works. So let's say a deputy gets a call, and that deputy goes to a house and there's a domestic situation. We'll say it's a husband and wife, and there's some sort of situation. And what happens then? So let's just go from step by step. What's the next step? Let's say there was some sort of either verbal or physical contact with the wife. What happens? And I'll ask you, Corporal Bourque, what goes on from that point?
So the deputy will separate everybody that's there and speak to everybody that was involved and figure out if they have a crime that occurred. And if there's a crime that occurred, they will make an arrest. From there, my unit will review the police report. And then Jessie will talk more about this in a minute. But if it's a case that she needs to follow up on with the survivor, then that gets relayed to her, so she follows up.
Okay, so she follows up with the survivor. So what does your unit do?
So if the arrest is already made, we review the case to make sure the investigation is complete. If an arrest isn't made, we follow up on the felony cases, and then we go out and write an arrest warrant and get the defendant arrested.
All right. So then Jessie, we'll use the same scenario.
Yes.
Let's say there was an arrest made, and now there's a victim, a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
What is your role now?
So at that time, I'd reach out to the survivor and I would explain our services, that we were able to help with injunctions. We also have a office space on the 5th floor, room 520. And we also have attorneys that can assist with potential injunctions and representing them in the courthouse. We also offer outreach services, which is more like peer counseling and also group counseling. And then I would tailor a safety plan with them. Sometimes they're interested in relocation through the Office of Attorney General. They have to be willing to prosecute, and I'm able to file the victim compensation. Only a certified domestic violence agency can file those types of relocation for the survivor. So it's very important to have somebody in-house to be able to fill out that application to send over to the Office of Attorney General for them to relocate, and then just explain the civil side of things and also the criminal side as well.
I can imagine. I can't imagine, but I can sort of ask the question. I can imagine if there's, if you're a woman and maybe you've been abused, you might not know all these different avenues that you can go down. I mean, you might know, maybe I can prosecute or be a witness, but there's so many other ways to get help. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Oh, definitely. They're able to always call our 1-800-500-1119 statewide hotline and reach out for services. A lot of times they just don't even know that they're experiencing domestic violence. I always tell people, if they are in an unhealthy relationship, if they're scared of their intimate partner, if they're not able to speak up and talk about just their opinion, there's a problem.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I don't think, when you say domestic violence or domestic abuse, it doesn't have to always be physical.
No.
I mean, it can be other things as well.
Yes.
Right. It can be someone controlling someone's movements, monitoring their cell phone activity, not letting them have access to money, or not having them have legal documents like their passport or their birth certificate. All of those things are domestic violence, but it may not be criminal, but it's something that's still, it's not okay.
And also, I imagine if you're somebody who has maybe been in this relationship for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and this has been your life for that long, you might not even know
that there's resources there.
Or that this is wrong, or
Yes.
this is not how it is for everybody else. You might say, well, this is how I've lived for 10 years, and then maybe something happens. Maybe it gets to a point where, okay, this isn't right, or maybe somebody reaches out, because I know we do a lot of outreach as well.
We do. And we also have a lot of family members that might notice something's not okay, that their best friend is now isolated from them and they haven't talked to them in a long time. And then they start to figure out something's not right. And they may call 911 or reach out to us. And, as the corporal of the domestic crimes unit, it may not be criminal, but I'll recognize that as something that, hey, maybe Harbor House or Jessie can help and get that survivor some assistance.
Yes.
That's a good point. How do calls typically come in? Is it because somebody who's being abused calls 911? Is it a neighbor that hears an argument? Is it a family member, or is it a little bit of everything?
I think it's really a lot of everything. We get a lot of neighbors that'll call in and say, we've heard screaming and yelling from the apartment next door. Sometimes we get stuff in through social media that has been emailed to me that says, hey, my friend sent me this video and I see that, she's being battered. Help her.
Yeah.
So that was a case that I worked recently that, I'm very glad when someone reaches out and says, hey, this is what's going on in somebody's life. Help them.
That's really interesting you say that because, I work here at the sheriff's office. I do a lot of stuff, a lot of video, a lot of things online. And I've come to realize that we get a lot of information in social media. And I know there's a lot of bad things that happen on social media. We all see that. But there's also a lot of ways to sort of send information that gets directly to the sheriff's office. I mean, it's one thing to call 911 or a non-emergency number, but some people, they just don't want to do that. They'd rather text it in or they'd rather send a photo. And also, I'm sure with social media, or even any messaging app, you do have the ability to send a video to you. And now you sort of have a little bit of evidence to maybe go and check on this person. Is that right?
Very much so. So from that video that got emailed in, I contacted the survivor, asked him to come in and meet with me. And I worked that case from start to finish within a couple hours. And that defendant was arrested that same night.
Oh, wow. So Jessie, is that a normal term? Is that what we use, survivor, for this?
Yes. Because
how come?
For me, they're victims when the crime occurs, but afterwards they're survivors because they've gone through this trauma.
Okay. So what's are survivors, are they usually reluctant to want to go to court or is it sort of 50-50? You just never know.
You just never know. The criminal process is such a long process. I mean, especially if there's a non-arrest, sometimes it'll take the state attorney a little bit to reach out to the survivor. So I always say that once a criminal case like they'll get arrested here or they'll get arrested within this jurisdiction, my job continues because then I walk them through the criminal process. I'm with them during the whole entire time through bond hearings. If they need to go back to court to file an injunction, if they need to do the deposition, or if they need to go to pre-trial or trial, I'm with them during that whole entire process to keep them engaged, to hopefully continue with the criminal process and keep the batterer accountable for his behavior.
So Jessie, how many cases do you juggle at the same time?
It just depends. Every day is a different day here. It's all by priority and what's going on. I can have anywhere from my caseload, I'd say 30 to 40 cases.
Wow. And so you got to keep track of all the steps of all these different cases.
Yes, and where they're at in the process of the criminal process and also the civil side of things too.
So we'll just take, for example, once again, let's say we have 30 or 40 cases. Of those 30 or 40 cases, how many of those, and I'm just going to say women right now. I know this doesn't happen to just women, but I'm just going to say right now, we'll say survivors. Maybe that's easier. Of those 30 or 40 survivors, how many are still maybe living with the person who abused them? Or do you usually get them out of the house and they're gone?
Majority of the time they have fled their abuser.
Okay, good.
At that point. But some do return.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
It might not be safe for them to leave at that point. So the biggest thing is safety planning with them. And a lot of people ask, why don't they leave? But that's the most dangerous time for them to leave. They have to set up a safety plan. Their lethality increases like 70% by the time they decide to leave that abusive relationship. So it's very important to have steps in place for that survivor before he or she walks out that door.
So what are those steps? I mean, do you get them a place to live, or
we have an emergency shelter where they're able to stay there for 6 to 12 weeks. During that time, we transition them with a case manager. We have 4 case managers that work out of our shelter that will transition that survivor. We can also sometimes assist with first month's rent, electricity. It just depends on what type of resources that we have at that particular time. But we're definitely working with collaborations with different agencies throughout Orange County.
Okay. So Corporal Bourque, so it sounds like Jessie's side is the survivor side. Your side is the other side. correct? And
Right.
so how does that work? So do you also have 30, 40 cases that you're handling, making sure these go through the court, or you just arrest them, or maybe just explain sort of your side of it?
Okay. So last year we had about 5,600 domestic violence reports that came through.
Okay, that's a lot.
It's a lot. So most of the time our patrol deputies will handle that investigation from start to finish. So that kind of lessens our load. But our felony cases are divided amongst our detectives. And so they work the case from start to finish. Once the defendant is arrested and they've put their entire case together, then that case will be done and they'll follow up with the court process. So we definitely don't handle as much per person as Jessie does.
Yeah. So your side of it, once again, so you deal with the abuser side of it. I want to ask this question, like what happens when they come in? So I assume you interview them or somebody interviews them, and then like what's usually the response? Like what do they usually say? We just had an argument, it's no big deal, or like what's usually their defense when this happens?
Sometimes they will downplay it as to, it really got out of hand. That's not exactly what happened. It's exaggerated. Sometimes they will disclose exactly what happened, that they hit the other person or that they strangled them. And they will tell you it's out of a fit of rage, that they didn't even really know what they were doing until after the fact.
And I'm sure you've heard all of these things before. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'll bet you have little sympathy for any of that.
I do. Anybody that puts their hands on somebody else is just should not be out and about in this community.
Yeah.
It just shouldn't.
Is it typically people that are repeat offenders, or is it a one-time thing and then they maybe get treatment and then they're better, or is it usually you see the same? I don't want to say you see the same people, but that these are repeat offenders.
A lot of times when we look into the person's history, this is not the first time that they've been arrested for domestic violence. And they might also have drug arrests. It's a complex situation. And, it really is going to depend on that defendant if they want to change their life and not beat, women or whether they're going to continue with this lifestyle.
And, do you ever see people that sort of did something, they were arrested, they served their time, and they've changed, or is that a rarity?
I would kind of be assuming, because I don't really.
Okay. I guess I asked that.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe somebody came back in 10 years or 15 or 20 years and said, I was wrong, I messed up, and I've come to learn my ways, but maybe that is so rare that it's usually the other way. And I assume it's the other way. I mean, it's usually, you're a repeat offender, like you said. And so you see the same people over and over.
Well, and then unfortunately with our job, we kind of see the bad things that happen.
Yeah.
A lot of times we don't see the good. I'm hopeful that hopefully when somebody serves their time in jail, that they'll see that this is not something they want to be doing to somebody else.
What would be what's the typical punishment, or what would be the jail time? I mean, how does that work? What's that side of it?
And that's complex as well. Very complex. I really have no idea. It's going to depend on the crime and depend on their history, and if they take a plea deal or if they go to trial. Every situation is going to be different. Okay.
How about you, Jess? I mean, do you keep up with the survivors over the years and get to see? Tell me about that. I mean, do you get to see some sort of good, positive endings to some of these situations?
Definitely. Some a lot of our survivors will reach out to us through our hotline, and they'll just be like, "Hey, tell Miss Jessie I'm doing this," and that is very rewarding, and it makes you realize why you're here every day, trying to make a difference. A lot of our survivors do reach out to us afterwards, and they actually will come to our Purple Door luncheon and end up doing testimonies and speaking about their outcomes once they leave these relationships.
And that was this week, correct?
Last week.
Oh, last week. I apologize. Yeah, it was recent. And so tell me about that. You have people come back and sort of give some testimonies?
No, definitely. They come back and they talk to our survivors, just letting them know what they experienced and the help that they were able to receive through Harbor House and how they were able to come through everything. We have different programs, again, that can help them go through college. We have one of the advocates is really great about applying for the WISP scholarship. So we are able to help survivors go back to college and finish some of their dreams that they wanted to do when they were in these relationships that they weren't able to do.
So when you have a survivor come in, and let's say it's early on in the process, and maybe they are reluctant to want to go in front of a jury or even go in front of their abuser, I mean, what do you say, or how do you?
Well,
I don't want to say convince them, but what do you say?
Well, normally what I do is I listen to them, because a lot of times nobody's listened for a long time. And after they talk to me, we have a thing that's called the power and control wheel. And I like to just slide it out, and everything that they discuss with me, I circle everything.
Okay.
And then I just let them know that this is not a healthy relationship. And we safety plan, and then they go home and they think about everything. And then usually within a couple of days, they might call and say, hey, Jess, I need some help. I want to get out of this relationship. I may not want to prosecute. I may just want to continue with my life and just move forward. And that's okay for us as well. I mean, sometimes not with the sheriff's office, but
but it absolutely is okay. Like for me, as long as they're out of that situation and they're safe, I'm very happy. You know, I see police reports where they necessarily don't want to cooperate with law enforcement, and I will still make sure Jessie is aware of it, because my concern is that survivor, is that person, to make sure their life, they're not living in fear.
Yeah, and I get that. I mean, I'm sure, like Jessie said, you want everybody to pay for their crimes, but sometimes reality is a little bit different, and not everybody is going to go through with it. But in the end, if that person, that survivor, can get out of that situation, move on, and hopefully never, ever, ever have contact with their abuser, I guess that's better than going back and trying to sort it out. I mean, it's better than another alternative, I guess.
Absolutely.
So I get that.
Like, we have to meet them at what they're comfortable with. And if now is not the time that they want to proceed with criminal charges, then I completely understand that.
What are some of the challenges that you face every day? I'll ask you first, Corporal Bourque. I'll let Jessie think about that question. Yeah. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you face?
I would say the biggest challenges are getting the survivors to tell us what's happening and to trust us to help them through the process. You know, they're afraid that their offender will get arrested and then get out of jail, and then what happens? So that's really where Harbor House and getting an injunction come into play, so that if that defendant does bond out of jail, there is measures in place for law enforcement to intervene again if something bad happens.
Okay. All right. And you, Jessie, what's the biggest challenge for you?
I think for barriers, there's so many financial.
You mean for the survivors? You know, maybe their abuser is the one that makes the money in the relationship, or has the control of all the money.
Well, just like Corporal said, I mean, a lot of the barriers are them taking away documentations, their birth certificates, their social security cards, their driver's license. How are they going to get a job if they have no identification?
Yeah.
Going through that process, trying to figure out how they're even going to get that birth certificate or driver's license. A lot of barriers are money. How are they going to leave this relationship? They have children. He controls everything. There's doorbell ring where if she steps out that front door, he knows at that moment that he or she is wanting to leave this relationship. Where are you going? What are you doing? So at that point, that person feels hopeless. How is she going to get out of this relationship if she has no way to move forward or to get a job or have any type of independence for herself?
And I think it's hard sometimes for people that have healthy relationships. They have a wife they love, they have a husband they love, and then they hear these stories. Well, yeah, I would just leave. I mean, that's so simple. I mean, you know, they're treating me bad or they're abusing me. I would just get up and go. But
it's not that easy.
It's not that easy, like you said.
If you have children, you have a pet. Harbor House, we have a kennel.
And this is a new thing. In the last few years, I remember that this was a big deal because a lot of people say, once again, they don't want to go because they love their dog and their abuser might abuse the dog.
That's sometimes one of the first things that they do is abuse the pet. So we also have a kennel on our facility as well that survivors are able to come there and bring their pets there as well. Just an array of things.
Yeah. We also find that, you know, the survivor still loves the person that's abusing them. They've been with them for a while. And when they first started the relationship, it wasn't like this. And then over time, the control started happening.
Yeah.
And they don't even know how they ended up in this situation.
Yeah.
And so there could be a substance abuse problem with the defendant. There could be depression. There could be a host of mental illnesses that are going on, and they might want to fix that person who's struggling.
Yeah.
We see that a lot because they love them.
They love them. And like, you know, they've been with them for, like you said, 10, 20, 30 years, their whole lives or most of their lives.
Yes.
And you think, well, you know, I like you said, I can fix this person, or maybe it's just a rough patch we're having. And then I'm sure eventually it gets to a point where you say, well, this isn't a rough patch. This is how life is going to be. And that's when it's time, or even before then probably is a time to step in and sort of know what's going on and reach out to somebody. How do you reach out? Is the way to call 911? Or let's say I'm somebody who's getting abused. Is it to call 911? Is it to call the Harbor House? Is it to send a message on social media? Or is it sort of any way you can contact somebody?
So I would say if there's an emergency happening, if you are actively in danger, I would say call 911. If you are separated from that person, you're not in immediate danger, then you can take a different avenue of what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
You can, call 911. You can call the non-emergency number. You can show up at the sheriff's office. You can call Harbor House. You can tell a friend what's going on and ask for help. There's so many different options.
And we have social media as well, where we have survivors reach out to us through instant messenger, through Facebook and Instagram, and all those different social ways as well too.
All right. So I saw that you recently got a grant from Lyft. Explain this to me.
Yeah, so a few months ago, we applied for a grant from Lyft.
What is Lyft? How about you explain that too?
So people who don't use rideshare, Lyft is app-based, and people who need a ride, they go in, they pin where they're at, and then they request a ride, and someone from Lyft, who's a driver, come and picks them up and takes them to their location.
All right.
So they use their smartphone.
So you got a grant from Lyft.
Correct. So Lyft wanted to help out domestic violence survivors and make sure they had transportation. So there is funding now if you are a domestic violence survivor and you need a ride to the police department, to the courthouse, to Harbor House, to a doctor's appointment, for a job interview, a host of things that a survivor might need help with. They can contact the sheriff's office, and then we will send them a link to get a free ride from Lyft.
Oh, that's great. So how much was the grant for?
I believe Lyft gave us $5,000 and the
okay.
sheriff's office matched it.
Oh, wow.
And so if you are in need of those services, you can talk to any deputy that you speak at the sheriff's office, or you can email us at lyft, Lyft, at ocfl.net.
Oh, that's great. That's a great program. And hopefully that'll go on farther than when the grant finishes. So I think it's a good idea.
That is my hope, that once the grant comes to a close, that we will be able to find more funding, whether it's through Lyft or a local source, to continue that.
I'm sure some sort of local organization can step up and maybe help out with that.
I would hope so.
So Corporal Bourque, I asked this to a lot of deputies as well. I know the job here at the sheriff's office can be difficult. I mean, what sort of motivates you to keep wanting to do this? Because I'm sure every day you hear terrible stories. You too, Jessie. I don't want to exclude you, but I'm sure you hear some pretty terrible things all day. I mean, what do you find rewarding, and what sort of keeps you going?
What I find rewarding is after the arrest, and their survivor will come back to me and say, I'm doing awesome. I have a job. I don't feel afraid anymore. My abuser is in jail, and my life is what I want it to be. That is what I find as to what keeps me going on a daily basis.
How about you, Jessie?
What keeps me going?
Yeah.
Just knowing that there's hope for that survivor, to know that there's going to be some type of resources, and at the end of the day that she's going to find happiness, free of violence.
So you sort of just touched on that a second ago, and I don't know the stats, and maybe you can enlighten our listeners here and me. I'm sure most of the time survivors are women, but I'm sure every now and then
1 out of 4 women will experience this in their lifetime.
Okay. And so the reverse of that, I mean, how often do you get men that come in that say they're the survivor?
1 out of 7.
Oh, okay. So that's more than I thought. Actually, yes. I'm a little surprised. So is it the same when you work with them, when you work with a man? Okay.
Oh, yeah. We offer services to everybody. So we're able to accept males into our shelter, also transgender, all of those. We don't exclude from anybody.
Okay. Because like I said, I think when you think of this, I just think the natural thing is to think of a woman being abused, but it's not always that case, but no. I'm sure that's the more likely scenario.
Yes.
Okay. Do men find it more difficult to maybe speak up and want to say something, or
They're a little bit more timid or a little bit more shy about talking about their domestic violence because they never wanted to hit their partner or defend themselves. So they feel like maybe they're a little bit weak at times.
No, I get that.
But I do work with male survivors as well. Some of them don't go into shelter, but they will file for the relocation and do support groups and decide to flee that way.
So we talked a little bit about technology, Corporal Bourque. Well, what's sort of the future of this? Is there what are some of the are there any new techniques or new ways to help survivors or find abusers or?
Wow, I don't.
Jessie, how about you, Jessie?
Well, I think for us, this early victim engagement program has been great because we're able to respond right when we get the police report. And also I referred earlier to the booking and release center, having an advocate there once the abuser or defendant or perpetrator is arrested, having an advocate there during the arrest process to accompany that survivor during first appearances when the defendant is arrested. And so having an advocate there within the first 24 to 72 hours just to guide them and walk them through everything.
So I would also assume a lot of this stuff happens at night. So do you two just get the cases the next day, or is there somebody there also helping? I know the deputies are there, but is it usually you just got to kind of wait till the morning?
So with us, the deputies are there 24/7. They're going to respond out as soon as something happens and take action. If there's a severe situation, our detectives will get called out and they will start their investigation. And the deputies are also able to contact, there's a law enforcement line for Harbor House. So if they're on scene with a survivor that needs assistance right then and there, they make the call to Harbor House, they speak with an advocate, and then they put the survivor on the line. That way they can assist and provide services.
Okay.
We have a line it's only for law enforcement called First Call. So as she said, the deputy or the officer is able to call directly to the shelter, and then an advocate is there to assist right there immediately. If it's something really big, sometimes the detectives will text me or email me and ask, "Hey Jess, I need some help." And at that time I'll assist, even if it's after hours. It happens.
So domestic crimes, going back to just sort of the whole unit, is that it happens more than most people, I think, sometimes think. I mean, you obviously hear about like the major cases when something really, really, really tragic happens. But I mean, as you said, how many?
5,600 reports were taken. But what we find is, they're reporting the one incident, but they could be being battered for many, many months and not reporting all those things that happened to them. So then when we interview them, we start learning, they were hurt, they were injured, they went to the hospital, but they told the doctor, they fell or it was an accident, and they didn't tell them exactly what happened. So when we start our interview, we go back for the length of that relationship to try to understand when did it start and how long has it been happening.
Yeah, and for everyone that I'm sure gets reported, and even if they underreport it, there's probably dozens or hundreds or thousands that never, ever get reported.
Absolutely.
And go ahead.
No,
Jessie.
Last year alone, I reviewed over 1,300 police reports. I reached out to over 800 people, and I safety planned with close to 426 survivors last year, and had close to over a little bit over 90 face-to-face, which is basically meeting with the survivor.
A different one?
Yes.
Okay. And you're the only one here doing this at the sheriff's office?
Yes. No, but I have a team of people.
Okay,
I have a great supervisor. I also have coworkers, which again is an Apopka Police Department. Also, all of the advocates, we're a team really at Harbor House. So if there's times that I can't do something or something's going on, all I have to do is send an email or reach out, and somebody's going to help out.
And the way we do it here in Orange County, is it different than maybe how they do it in other counties or around the country? Or are there different ways to sort of handle this, or is this sort of like the standard?
I feel like we have a lot more support from Harbor House than maybe a lot of other counties do, especially smaller jurisdictions that may or may not even have a shelter in their county. So I feel like we are lucky to have this great partnership with someone in our office that I can literally walk next door from my office and say, "Hey, Jessie, I have this case. I need help." And she will stop what she's doing and figure out how to help that survivor.
And I know I've read a few columns and stories about domestic violence, and I think we touched on this a little bit. It's generally not just a one-time thing. It's a repeat offender thing. And I've also heard that the people that are doing the abusing, they can go on and do much, much, much worse things. I mean, when you hear about, workplace shootings, or when you hear about, mass shootings, a lot of times, I'm not saying every time, but a lot of times you can go back to some of those men and say, oh, well, they also had a history of domestic violence. Is that true?
It is, and it's a fear in every case that I review, of what if something further happens? Am I going to wake up tomorrow and look at the news and realize that one of my survivors was murdered? Did I do enough? Did we as an agency do enough? And so it just is a really big fear of mine.
It is.
All right. So let's say you're listening to this and you want to reach out. What's the best way to reach out? What's the number to call if you're experiencing domestic violence?
Well, we have a statewide hotline, 1-800-500-1119. They're also able to call Harbor House here directly at 407-886-2856, and they can speak to an advocate immediately. We're staffed 24/7 as well on our crisis line.
Well, Corporal Bourque, Jessie Motley, thank you so much for being on Behind the Star, and we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you,
John.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Behind the Star. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Also, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Until next time, I'm Jon Busdeker, and this is Behind the Star.